Biden visiting tunnels to promote $1 trillion infrastructure law. Sixth Memphis officer relieved of duty in Tyre, Nichols arrest. Israel threatens Palestinians with death penalty by electric chair. A German Islamophobe shoots and sets fire to a Muslim neighbor's apartment. Kashmir Freedom Conference criticizes raid of its office in Indian-held Kashmir. Bosnian man walking from Austria to Mecca for Hajj despite freezing cold. From our Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. U.S. President Joe Biden touted investments in infrastructure on Monday. This was while visiting a 150-year-old tunnel that's been a bottleneck for rail traffic near Baltimore, Maryland. Its replacement is expected to create 30,000 jobs, including roughly 20,000 in construction, the White House said. Biden is on a mission to promote the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law, which was passed last November. It includes $550 billion in new spending for public transit, passenger rail, bridges, and water and sewer systems. The narrow Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel has long snarled freight and passenger traffic heading south from Baltimore's Penn Station. That includes trains the president would take from his home state of Delaware to Washington, D.C. while serving as a U.S. Senator. The tunnel is the largest rail bottleneck along the heavily used Northeast Corridor, which runs from Washington, D.C. to Boston. Biden then visited the tunnel connecting Manhattan, New York, and New Jersey. Dozens of migrants in New York City waited outside the Watson Hotel in Hell's Kitchen on Monday, refusing to leave for a new shelter at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal. Footage shows the migrants waiting outside the Manhattan Hotel because they didn't want to be sent to the terminal. New York City has received more than 3,000 asylum seekers in the past few weeks. The latest arrivals bring the number of migrants seeking asylum in the city to around 40,000 since last spring, the mayor's office said. Republican governors blame Democrats for the migrant crisis. This is why, since last year, they have sent thousands of migrants from Texas and Arizona to Democrat-controlled cities, including New York and Washington, D.C. As a Black Muslim mother, when Jamila Tompkins Bigelow gave birth to her sons, she was inspired to start building the world she wanted for them. In an interview with Philadelphia's KYW News Radio last week, she said she wanted to write more children's books that represented families like her own. Tompkins Bigelow took to different forms of writing and published several children's books. The former Philadelphia teacher is now a best-selling author. Her books are in shops such as Uncle Bobby's in Germantown and have also made it into homes, classrooms, and school curriculums nationwide. Her book, Your Name is a Song, celebrates the musicality of different names that often get mispronounced. That one made it into school curriculums. But a few of her other books have also been banned by certain school districts across the country. She said for every disgruntled parent speaking out against her children's books, there are countless families positively affected by the representation they bring. A sixth Memphis police officer has been disciplined for his involvement in the brutal beating and arrest of Tyre Nichols, a department spokeswoman said. Officer Preston Hemphill was relieved of duty shortly after Nichols' January 7th arrest. Nichols died 3 days later at a hospital. Memphis police spokeswoman Karen Rudolph did not disclose Hemphill's role in the arrest. She said information about disciplinary action against Hemphill was not immediately released because he was not fired. The department typically releases information about officers relieved of duty after an investigation ends. Video footage released Friday showed 5 Memphis police officers using a stun gun, a baton, and their fists to pummel Nichols during the arrest. The 29-year-old was pulled over on suspicion of reckless driving. In the video, he was heard calling for his mother and seen struggling with his injuries as he sat on the pavement. Nichols' funeral service is scheduled for Wednesday at a Memphis church. A Muslim congregation says it has been locked out of its mosque by Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Members of the King Khalid Mosque have worshipped inside the International Studies Center on campus for 40 years. After closing the mosque during the COVID-19 pandemic, the university decided not to reopen it. Yet a Christian chapel on campus, Boyd Chapel, remains open to the public and holds regular services. University representatives have not explained their decision to close the mosque. On Friday, dozens of protesters joined in a prayer to draw attention to their plight. Imam Juma Musa called the Baptist-affiliated university's action pure discrimination. A university statement said in response to the protests, Shaw University respects the First Amendment rights of individuals to peaceably assemble and voice their concerns. The statement said the International Studies Center is open and available for use to enrolled students. Access to the mosque by Shaw students is coordinated through the university's chaplain office, it added. Israel is threatening Palestinians with death by the electric chair. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir on Monday vowed to push for the death penalty against Palestinians involved in attacks against Israelis. Ben-Gvir said anyone who murders, harms, and slaughters civilians should be sent to the electric chair. He was speaking during a meeting of his far-right Jewish Strength Party, Israel Channel 13 reported. Ben-Gvir is pushing Israel's parliament to pass legislation to use the death penalty against Palestinians involved in attacks against Israelis. The far-right minister said he asked for imposing a curfew on Palestinian neighborhoods that pose a threat to Israel. He also urged the arrest of those holding weapons. On Sunday, Ben-Gvir ordered the demolition of 14 Palestinian-owned homes in occupied East Jerusalem, citing a lack of construction permits. Tensions flared up in the Palestinian territories in recent days amid a spate of attacks. Israeli soldiers killed 9 Palestinians on Friday during a military operation. The next day, 7 Israelis were killed in a gun attack near a synagogue in occupied East Jerusalem. A government representative in the Canadian province of Quebec on Monday called for the resignation of the country's newly appointed representative to fight Islamophobia. But Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he supports Amina Al-Rawabi, whose appointment he announced last week. The human rights activist is the world's first government-appointed official to tackle the problem of Islamophobia. In a 2019 newspaper column, Al-Rawabi criticized the passage of Quebec's Bill 21. The law bans public servants from wearing religious symbols, including the hijab. Al-Rawabi's column raised the ire of Quebec's provincial language minister, Jean-François Roberge, this week. He claimed she did not offer an acceptable apology for the criticism, and that means she seems to hold what he called anti-Quebec sentiment. Roberge called for Al-Rawabi's resignation or immediate removal by the federal government. Al-Rawabi said she stands by what she wrote and never painted the majority of Quebecers as Islamophobic. Trudeau said her role is to advise the government on policies to counter Islamophobia and to speak for Muslims. A German man attacked a neighboring Turkish family with an air rifle and then set fire to their apartment in the town of Hilaggenhaus. A local daily newspaper reported the incident occurred on Friday. The next day, the suspect was brought before a magistrate who issued a warrant for his arrest, the public prosecutor's office and police said. Investigators said the couple injured in the incident had to be taken to a hospital for treatment. Their baby was not injured. A homicide squad has been set up under the direction of the Dusseldorf police, and the investigation is ongoing. Cluster munitions continue to pose a serious threat to civilians in war-torn Syria, a human rights group warned on Monday. The Syrian Network for Human Rights said the explosive weapons were used by regime and Russian forces in at least 496 attacks between July 2012 and this January. The NGO reported more than 1,000 civilians were killed in these attacks, including almost 400 children and more than 200 women. Cluster munitions are dropped from aircraft or fired from the ground or sea. They open up in mid-air to release tens of hundreds of submunitions or bomblets. These can saturate an area up to the size of several football fields. Many fail to explode on initial impact, leaving dangerous duds that can kill and maim like landmines. A team of Muslim community members in the Canadian city of Edmonton is working to address racism in faith spaces. The Anti-Racism Muslim Collaborative conducted community engagement to better understand anti-Black racism. Hanan Atitullah is an education coordinator with the advocacy group John Humphrey for Peace and Human Rights. She facilitated the project and said anti-Black racism is rampant in most spaces in our city. But Atitullah added it's not just in Muslim spaces, but rather everywhere. AMC released a report based on the community engagement sessions. It notes areas of improvement to make Muslim spaces more inclusive, safe, and welcoming for Black Muslims. The report identified the lack of spaces for Black people in Muslim communities, inclusivity for non-Arabic speaking Muslims, and representation in Muslim leadership. Black Muslims, most notably women, have been targets of hate-based violence and racist attacks in recent years. Police reported hate crimes against Muslims in Canada rose from 84 incidents in 2020 to 144 in 2021, Statistics Canada data shows. The report's recommendations include encouraging open discussion about racism and ensuring adequate translation at Friday prayer for non-Arabic speaking Muslims. A Bosnian Muslim man is walking more than 2,000 miles from Austria to Mecca to perform the Hajj pilgrimage. 52-year-old Enver Beganovic set out from his home in the Austrian city of Wels. He has traveled about 400 miles on foot to reach the Serbian city of Sjenica. Beganovic said he plotted out the route himself, and it will take at least 7 months and 7 days to reach his goal. He aims to reach Saudi Arabia on June 15th. Hajj is expected to begin on June 26 this year. Beganovic will pass through 12 countries during his difficult journey. He said he covers 21 to 37 miles a day, depending on weather conditions. The 52-year-old married father of 4 children said the decision to undertake this journey was a result of soul-searching. He told Andalu agency, "I was inspired by the fact that I felt I had drifted away from the faith." He added he needed time for himself to analyze his life. The All-Parties Hurriyat Conference, or Freedom Conference, on Sunday reacted strongly after an Indian government agency sealed its office in Indian-occupied Kashmir. India's National Investigation Agency targeted the Freedom Movement's office in Rajbagh, part of the region's largest city, Srinagar. The group said Kashmiris are well aware of the intent of India's repeated storming and sponsored attacks on its offices. The group added that those in control of Jammu and Kashmir should know the region's people desire a resolution of the Kashmir conflict and to live in peace. The Freedom Conference wants the United Nations to hold a referendum in Kashmir to choose their future as promised in its resolution. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
Thank you, Samana. Israelis came into Palestine West Bank in an unmarked truck and killed 9 or so Palestinians. And immediately after that, a Palestinian went into a synagogue and killed 7 Jews. Lives of both Palestinian and Jews is precious. What the world can do to stop this? Secretary of State from the United States, Blinken, is visiting. Can he tell people for a solution? It may stop, but it will flare up. Is US capable of bringing peace or helping people live with each other? We have with us Miko Peled. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Miko is an Israeli author, a podcaster, and human rights activist. So tell us, New York Times, I was reading to prepare for your show, and it begins by saying that Israeli and Palestinian appear to agree. Both are deeply skeptical, even scornful, of renewed calls made by the Biden administration this week for a two-state solution here. Do you think everybody is laughing at two-state solution now?
Oh, yes. They're not laughing, I think crying, because the fact that the myth of the two-state solution has been going on for so long is the reason that Israel has been so successful, because there's a side of Israel that is saying, well, of course we want peace, but, we just need to negotiate, and we want a two-state solution. And of course, no, they never meant it, but it was a good way it was like a smokescreen. It was a good way for them to allow themselves to get a stronger grip on all of Palestine, including the West Bank, and to tighten the grip on the 2 million people in Gaza, close the prison even tighter, and so on, and firm up the apartheid regime in a way that it is immovable. So nobody takes this seriously, and nobody takes Blinken seriously. As long as the United States is arming and supporting and giving billions and billions of dollars to Israel, then how could anybody expect the United States to be a broker for peace? The United States is paying for Israel to commit its crimes. It's providing Israel with the funding and the weapons to commit these horrific crimes against Palestinians, to maintain a vicious apartheid regime against the Palestinians. And this is not something new. It's not that they don't know. So, of course, people are skeptical. There's no reason to expect that that the American Secretary of State will bring any change. And then he stands next to Netanyahu and they praise Israeli democracy. Israeli democracy is an oxymoron. There's never been an Israeli democracy. Israel has always been an apartheid regime. So when the American administration sides with Israel on its lies and then pays Israel and gives Israel the weapons to commit its crimes, why would anybody have any faith in the United States when it comes to trying to figure out a solution? There is no faith, and this lack of faith is fully justified.
So when he meets with Palestinian President Abbas, what does he talk about?
Well, apparently they talked about giving the Palestinians better internet, 4G instead of 3G, because Israel has limited the Palestinian internet to only 3G. And when the Israelis talk to Abbas, they talk about providing more passes for VIPs and people who want to do business. And then the Palestinian Authority sells these VIPs for thousands and thousands of dollars and puts the money in their pocket. You know, nobody takes the Palestinian Authority seriously either. I mean, the Palestinian Authority is a subcontractor of the Israeli apartheid regime. Nobody takes it seriously. The Palestinians lost respect for the Palestinian Authority very, very long time ago. And so this is all a farce. It's a complete farce. And it's time to move on and start talking about how we really work towards a solution to the question of Palestine.
Now, in your conversation, you mention apartheid multiple times. In the United States media, we don't hear that. What about the Israeli media? Is their word apartheid appear somewhere in some conversations?
Well, they only mention it to say that the human rights organizations, including the Israeli one, B'Tselem, but also Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, who put together reports validating this claim and with good data and evidence that Israel is an apartheid regime. The only mention of that in the Israeli media is to say that it's anti-Semitic and to say that these highly reputable organizations are now anti-Semitic and this whole apartheid thing is anti-Semitic. That's the only context. The Israelis don't want to have this conversation. They don't have it in the media. They don't have it on the streets. They feel fully justified in doing what they're doing, and they have every intention to continue maintaining this apartheid regime as long as they possibly can.
You know, when South Africa was called apartheid state, that message was on placards everywhere in campuses all around the world, and it was public opinion around the world, which forced some of the changes in South Africa. In the case of Israel, it's a conservative organization like Amnesty International, which rarely calls names, is calling it apartheid. Human Rights Watch and Israeli Human Rights Organization B'Tselem also saying that. Why that term, such a major one, used one after another by three most powerful entities, is not making a difference in the consciousness of the world?
Because Israel has learned a great deal from the mistakes of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And on two levels. On the one level, they would have shot Nelson Mandela. They would not have allowed him to continue, and they would have shot they would have killed the entire upper echelon of the ANC leadership. And so they would have done that first. And on the other level, Israel has been engaged in spending billions of dollars on a very strong public relations campaign to justify, and then also to describe anybody who uses the word apartheid as anti-Semitic. So they've they have a new definition of anti-Semitism, which has been very successfully been adopted by governments across the world, local governments across the United States, the U.S. government, universities, churches, and so on. And it's spreading like wildfire, and nobody dares to reject this new definition. And this new definition includes, criticism of Israel. And so Israel has been very, very smart at not only deflecting but being ahead of the game so far that it is it's controlling the story, it's controlling the media, not the media, but it's controlling the narrative the way it is portrayed in the media. And so the notion of apartheid, I think even Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House of Representatives, said, the notion the Jewish people will run an apartheid regime is absurd. This is how they've been portraying it, and they've been doing a very successful job with their PR, both in the European countries and in the United States. And so that's why we don't hear about it. People are number one, afraid to be called anti-Semitic. And number two, the narrative is such that it doesn't allow for that conversation to ever be raised. And if it is raised, it is brushed away immediately.
So is there a real danger that in this state of paralysis that America fails to play any role and keep funding one side in the conflict, that Netanyahu might get away by throwing out several thousand more Palestinians from their own land?
Well, of course, except it's not a state of paralysis. It's the Palestinians are fighting very, very hard, both in Palestine and around the world. They're fighting what is unfortunately seems like a losing battle, but they are fighting very, very hard. And the Israelis are moving forward like Roman legions, through Palestine, destroying everything in their sight. And the United States is supporting Israel 110% with funding and with weapons. So that is the picture on the ground. We've got the largest power in the world giving Israel all the power it needs and plus in order to commit these horrendous crimes against a nation who's fighting for its liberation. And like I said, Palestinians are heroically standing, whether with arms or without arms, with all different methods of resistance to try to stand up and gain their liberation. So I think especially with this new government that has come into power in Israel, we're going to see a great deal more violence perpetrated against Palestinians. We're going to see a lot more attacks against Palestinians in the street, whether they're just children or men and women going to work, or journalists, of course, activists, of course, fighters, of course. We're going to see a great deal more ethnic cleansing from major parts of the country. And unless people of conscience stand up and demand the safety and security of Palestinians, demand guarantees for the safety and security of Palestinians, this is not going to stop.
Miko, State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel began the news conference recently by condemning the attack and stressing, quote unquote, "we stand with Israeli people." Do you recall any incident in which American government has said that we stand with Palestinian people also?
No. They will say all kinds of, watered down versions of, but when they're questioned about the rights of Palestinians and about the Palestinian right to defend themselves, that is never, ever, ever discussed. Because right now, again, the narrative is such that Israel has the right to defend itself. The question is, of course, never asked against what. Nobody talks about the rights of the Palestinians to defend themselves, even though for the last almost 100 years, and certainly coming up in the future, Palestinians are going to be the victims of a great deal of violence, and they have the right to defend themselves, although they have very, very little means. And so I think that is an important thing to raise. I think it's an important question. Why are countries around the world not standing up and demanding, number one, the rights of Palestinians to defend themselves, standing with the Palestinians, but doing more than standing with the Palestinians, demanding sanctions against Israel, demanding Israel end its human rights abuses, demanding, voice for the Palestinians. None of that is heard, like you said. And it's not only in America, it's not heard. We don't hear that anywhere, really.
Well, thank you so much, Miko Peled, for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Anytime. Thank you, my friend.
Back to you, Samana.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.